I am going to vote for the first time as a Canadian, and I'm sure that a lot of you watching are in the same boat. For those of you who don't know, I came to Canada in March of 2020, just before the pandemic, when Justin Trudeau was the Prime Minister and he was in fact re-elected in 2019. I was in the middle of the pandemic and I didn't care much about politics. In fact, I was largely thankful for the programs like Access Entry that allowed me to make the move. Fast forward 5 years and now I have to make a decision whether to vote for Pierre Poilievre's Conservative Party or for Mark Carney of Liberals. And I, for one, do not want to vote for the loudest. I want to vote on track record and policy. And me being me, there I went a rabbit hole of researching about both these parties across 40 years, what they promised in the past and what they delivered on. And I am going to share all that research with you in this video. So let's get started. So in today's video, we'll be talking about three things. The first one is who is Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney. It's very important to understand because these are two very, very different, both accomplished individuals. I'll talk about both. And then I'll be talking about conservatives versus liberals. The last 40 years, I actually went down the rabbit hole of going the last 40 years and understanding what happened in 1980s to 1990s to 2006, when conservatives were elected versus, when conservatives were overthrown, what led to those change in power. I think that is very important for me, at least, to understand who to vote for, because and that would just give me a sense of I'm just not voting on policy today, the promises today, but I'm actually looking at the promises that they made in the past and what they delivered on, and why were they overthrown after implementing some of those policies, right? It's very important to understand, at least for me. I don't know if you care about that, but it's very important for me. And then finally, it will be a build up to the next video that I'll be releasing on Wednesday. It'll be election 2025, breaking down their policy, like the current policy, the current promises that they're making, and I'll be breaking it down into the 6 parameters. And that, like I said, will be the part 2 of this video. First, let's talk about what Pierre Poilievre is. And by the way, before I start this is not a political video. This is not me trying to influence you whether to vote liberal or conservative. This is just me doing the research on both the parties because I'm voting for the first time. I want to understand a little bit more about both the parties and what they have done, and both the candidates and what they promise. And I'm not going to make any judgments on who to vote for. It's a personal decision, and you might lean left or right or center. Doesn't matter. I personally don't care, and I'm not going to give my decision of who I'm voting for. I'm just going to state the facts, and you can make a decision depending on what appeals to you. Let's talk about Pierre Poilievre. He's a career politician who has started as an MP in a very small area, and he was 25, right? So he has been doing this for the last 20 plus years, and he has held fairly important positions in Harper administration. When Stephen Harper became the Prime Minister of, and he was a conservative in 2006. One of the most notable things that he was a part of was the advocacy for tax cuts, the GST cut from 7% to 5%, the GST cut that we see, federal GST 5%. It was in fact 7%, before him and, a set of other people in Ministry of Finance advocated for the tax cut. He was also the Minister of Employment and Social Development, part of the team, worked on EI reform, some family support programs. So he has a very deep-rooted political background, and now he is the opposition leader and has maintained focus on fiscal discipline, tax relief, housing affordability, all of those things that are really important, especially in today's time, especially with the tariffs coming. All of this is more important than ever. Compared to Mark Carney, who has been a global economist, he has nothing to do with politics, right? A lot of people say he's an elitist. I don't know what that means, but here's his resume, which is very impressive to me. He has a bachelor's of economics in Harvard University. He has a master's of economics from University of Oxford. Investment banker in Goldman Sachs. That's probably because why he's called an elitist. He was the governor of Bank of Canada in probably the most difficult time that the world saw, arguably. But he's steered Canada past that during the subprime crisis. Canada did not get hit as bad as US. He was also appointed as the governor of Bank of England, the first ever non-Brit guy being elected, and it was a need of the hour because it was post-Brexit era, probably one of the most difficult times that England went through. He was also the chair of Financial Stability Board. After the subprime crisis, they built this board. When some of the institutions say that we are too big to fail, this committee was responsible. They were doing a lot of things, but they were responsible to find those loopholes and find the shadow banking and all these issues at a global scale, and he was chair of the committee again, pretty impressive. And he is a massive advocate for climate action, and he has cheered many initiatives globally, and he continues to do that even as Prime Minister or even when he's running for becoming the next Prime Minister of Canada. If you look at the history of power in Canada, 65 years of Liberals, 25 years of Conservatives. So Conservatives have only had like 3 major runs in the last 90 years, which says a lot about Canadians, that we are very, and when I say we, I'm just 5 years into this country, but like most Canadians are very, very liberal, and even if they tip towards right, they're still center right. That's why I think Conservatives were for the longest time called progressive Conservatives, because they were not really conservatives in the truest sense. They were not right wing. They were right center. Some ideologies were conservatives, but some of them were very progressive. Just some background on Canada, but it was very fascinating. Out of 90 years, only 65 years, only 25 years of conservative. So I wanted to understand what happened in these years. So red signifies, for those of you who are from US, red actually is reverse in Canada. Red is liberal, blue is conservative, and the first. In the last 40 years, the first major, election that was won by Conservative was by Brian Mulroney, who was the Prime Minister from 1983 to 1992. And first, I wanted to understand, what did Liberals do wrong? What did John Turner do wrong to lose by such a majority? Progressive Conservatives actually won by 211 seats. And if you look at this, Liberals actually lost because of a recession, and people wanted a change. People were stressed. They were financially stressed. And if you look at the 1981-82 recession just before the election, GDP declined by 5%, which is a lot. Inflation was 13%, which is like crazy. It's record high inflation. Unemployment was 12%. The only time that we have seen more unemployment is during COVID. And interest rates peaked at 21%. We have never seen interest rates like that ever. If you, even in Canada, the interest rates were at about 7% at the peak in the last 3 years. But 21% is just crazy, unheard of. Unemployment rate, like you can see, it peaked at 12%, and it again peaked during the next election. We'll talk about that as well. And there was a global crisis happening in Iran with the Iran revolution, where the global supply of oil was significantly cut with Iran going through this revolution that caused the overall recession in the US and therefore in Canada and the world. And there were some internal conflicts, especially with Alberta, with the center, which is Pierre Trudeau, who was the Prime Minister at that time. He came up with a national energy program where they wanted to reduce the dependency on global, energy, and they wanted to hold everything centrally and, run it centrally, and which was not taken very well internally amongst different provinces. So all this led to their downfall, and Brian Mulroney became the Prime Minister, and Conservatives came to power for the next 8 to 10 years. And now let's talk about, what he did as a Conservative between 1983 to 92 when he was in power. And the resume is again pretty impressive, I would say. Trade and global integration, this was 1980s. He came up with trade treaties with the US. This is called Canada-US Free Trade Agreement. And then there was NAFTA, which was North American Free Trade Agreement. All this, this still exists, right? Like, obviously, it has changed and it has extended. And now with Trump coming in, it's going crazy. But again, the trade agreements started, and Canada's economy started opening up to at least the whole of North America and then to the world. And it started in 1980s when he came to power. The tax modernization happened during this time because there was no GST at that time. There was something called as a hidden manufacturer sales tax, and it was applied very, in a very weird way, and it was a very tiered form of a very complicated tax system. And it was 13.5% on all manufactured goods. But then it, he came up with GST, which was much more simplified. It was much lower, 7%, but it got extended to services as well. It was not just manufacturer's tax. It was also applied on services. Which is why it was taken well by the economists, but not really taken well by the consumers, because they felt that they were paying more because they had to now pay it for services as well. He also privatized and deregularized a lot of industries. It allowed for more competition into these industries. And when there's more competition, there's less monopoly. What happens is the prices actually come down. Like for telecom, right? If you look at India, we actually pay like 10, 20 times more than what I would pay in India for the same telecom services, just because there are only a few players, and it's just almost like few players operating, and therefore the prices are very high. Obviously, it's more complicated, but he actually invited more competition so that the prices of services actually comes down. He reduced the tax. First of all, the brackets were very complicated: 10 brackets to 3 brackets, 34% federal tax reduced to 29%, corporate tax also reduced. He also did a lot of spending cuts, which normally happens when government changes. There are a lot of spending that just gets grandfathered from one generation to another within one party, and this is happening now as well. I made that in my tax video that there's $131 billion being spent on God knows what, which is almost over 50% of their budget. I'll probably talk about that in the next video. But there were spending cuts, but some of those spending cuts were not very popular. Like the agricultural subsidies were removed, and it was not a very popular move. And then there were immigration reforms, and contrary to popular belief, where people say that conservatives are anti-immigration, that's not the case. Access entry program was actually started by the conservatives, and during his term in the last year, 250,000 people came to Canada in 1993, and he also came up with the Canada's Multiculturalism Act of 1988, and it still holds. So again, all these reforms were a landmark of his tenure. However, he still lost, and if you look at the trajectory, conservatives won with 211 seats in 1984, and they only got 2 seats, and there were some internal conflicts which led to Quebec and Alberta making their own parties, and then Liberals happened to win and gain a lot of traction because, again, people wanted change, and it was largely because of the GST, which was not very popular, as I said, and the privatization was not really taken well by the industry, at large. But the biggest reason why they lost is the same reason why Liberals lost 10 years ago, and that was that there was a recession, the 1990s recession, which again coincided with the election. The GDP declined by 2%, inflation was 6%, unemployment was 11%, interest rate was still high at 14%, and all this again warranted voters to appeal for a change, and they voted Liberals back in because they thought that it'll change the economy or there'll be no recession, which is false, right? I think basing our decision to what party comes based on that, we are tired of this recession and they have caused a lot of unemployment and inflation. Honestly, given the global, how connected we are globally, any one global event like tariffs, which Canada has no role to play, it's the US that's causing it, or COVID, it can actually just turn the economy upside down. So voting on the basis of an economic downturn is probably not the right decision, but yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm oversimplifying it. Now, when conservatives came to power, the federal debt was $200 billion, which increased to more than double and they said that they'll reduce it to half. But again, there was a recession, and the interest rates when conservatives came to power was 21%. That basically means that you have to service the debt at 21% or close to that at a very high interest rate as well. And that is very difficult to balance. So the federal debt actually increased after this 1990s recession to more than double what it was 10 years ago. Coming back to this graph, this was the year when the elections happened and Liberals won again, and they had a very good run of 12 years, and then they did some stupid things. I'll talk about that. And then Stephen Harper became the prime minister, and again conservatives came to power for almost about 8 years, 2 terms. Now, one of the main reasons why Liberals lost the election in 2006 to Stephen Harper was not a recession. For a change, it was not recession. The market was in fact booming and they were doing pretty well. They could have won and they did not lose by a massive margin, but they were caught in a scandal, which was called the sponsorship scandal, ad scam. And I'll just read through this. A sponsorship program began in 1996. Public money was directed from Department of Public Works and Government Services to private advertising agencies to promote Canada and federal government at cultural, community and sports events in Quebec. So what was happening was that these advertising agencies were hundreds and millions of dollars were being funneled, were one-man, companies, and it was done in the name of, spreading culture and, promoting Canada, but it was actually going into liberal pockets. There were, I think, 3 or 5 people who were named, and it was actually proven that this scandal happened, and they actually pocketed all these government funds. This was taxpayers' money that was going, and people were mad about this. They actually lost the election just on the basis of this, and this was just not something that they would have anticipated, but they did it, right? So clearly they deserved the loss. Now, this is 2006 and Stephen Harper has come into power, and they did some really good things again, when they were in power. They navigated the 2008 global financial crisis. This was 2 years into power, and now he didn't, like Stephen Harper and the conservative government should not be given 100% credit for this, because this guy, who is Mark Carney, he was the Bank of Canada governor at that time, and in a recession, in a global crisis, governor becomes a really important person because he's the person who is changing the interest rates, playing with inflation, trying to, maintain, fiscal levels in Canada, which is very difficult. We have seen that it's very fresh in our memories in the last 3 years after COVID, what has happened. And he was actually named the central bank governor of the year. And he was, put at global stages. He got, a place in Bank of England, all that, good things. But again, he worked with the Conservative government and it happened under Stephen Harper's watch. And I feel that both of those people, Conservatives and Mark Carney's guidance helped us not get impacted by the subprime crisis as much. Debt and GDP debt to GDP ratio among the lowest in G7, and that was again a testament to how they were cutting down on spending and they were bringing in new money. They lowered the corporate taxes and GST to 5%, which is again it's very typical of Conservative when they come. In fact, if you look at the Pierre Poilievre policies right now, he wants to cut taxes and reduce spending. Right, so lower corporate taxes and GST to 5%, promoted Canada as an energy superpower, which is something that Pierre Poilievre is also saying. So it's fascinating, right? So all these things are being said again in this election, and these are all good things. I agree that we have so much natural resources, we are just underutilizing this. But the flip side is that there's a climate change that we need to also take into consideration. And if we become an energy superpower, that also means more emissions. And how do we balance that? Signed 40 plus free trade agreements, which is again amazing. Raised TFSA limit to $10,000 per year. We don't have $10,000 per year right now because Justin Trudeau actually reduced the limit back to $6,000 and now it's about $7,000. Introduced UCCB, which is childcare benefit. It was called Universal Childcare Benefit at that time. It was $160 per month per kid, per family. He started the RESP grant as well, the grant that we know of today. Again, I just feel like all this is the exact same thing that Pierre Poilievre is saying right now, and they actually delivered on a lot of these things. They also launched the Express Entry system. In fact, a lot of people think that Justin Trudeau's government was the one who launched Express Entry, but that's not the case. It was launched just before they got elected. Liberals got elected, so it was Conservatives who started the Express Entry system, and that's something that I came to Canada with, and a lot of you actually watching came to Canada with. It still exists, right, in a different shape and form, but it still exists. But this administration made mistakes as well.
Stephen Harper says Canadians stand with the Conservatives when it comes to his party's move to ban the niqab at Canadian citizenship ceremonies.
The leader of the Liberal Party continues to bring up his position on the niqab, not seeming to understand why almost all Canadians oppose the wearing of face coverings during citizenship ceremonies. Mr. Speaker, it's very easy to understand. It's very easy to understand. We don't allow people to go uncovered, to cover their faces during citizenship ceremonies. And why would Canadians, contrary to our own values, embrace a practice at that time that is not transparent, that is not open, and frankly is rooted in a culture that is anti-women? And Mr. Speaker, that is unacceptable to Canadians, unacceptable to Canadian women, and that's why this government...
A re-elected Conservative government will also commit to establishing an RCMP tip line so that citizens and victims can call with information about incidents of barbaric cultural practices here in Canada, or to notify authorities that a child or a woman is at risk of being victimized. That these practices have no place in Canadian society.
That was Conservative candidate Kelly Leitch making that announcement in Ajax, Ontario. Susan, what do you make of this?
Disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. She should be ashamed of herself.
So 2015 barbaric cultural practices tip line. This was the nail in the coffin, and all minorities, not just Muslims, were against it. And a lot of Canadians were against this. And that actually just, was a spiral downwards for the Conservatives. Which brings us to the main question, Pierre Poilievre versus Mark Carney. And I want to, in the next video, I'll be comparing that in 6 parameters: taxes, housing, immigration, healthcare and social services, public safety, and climate change. And that's how I'll decide who will be my prime minister, or, at least who will I be voting for. And the reason why I say use the word my and I is because it's a very personal decision, and your decision could be swayed by certain policies here, which would be very different from mine. The reason why I'm showing this made this presentation before is because I wanted to go into the history of conservatives and liberals and trying to understand what they have done. I do understand liberals a little bit more because that's when I came in and I've seen liberals, play their cards in the last 4 or 5 years. Same goes for most of the audience here. That's the reason why I tipped myself heavily on what conservatives have done, because that's the unknown for most of us immigrants. That's all I have for today. Do make sure that you subscribe to the channel so that you do not miss the next video where I talk about these 6 parameters. मिलते हैं अगली वीडियो में, तब तक के लिए बाय बाय.